My name is Jacques Icter. I'm a farmer by profession and a hunter by inclination. I was born on June 1st, 1952. My ancestors had a farm 20 kilometers away in Savy, a small village in Picardy, in the north of the Aisne region, for many generations. My wife's name is Isabelle Ledieu. She's a daughter of the soil, too. We have 4 children, 3 girls and a boy. My farm is approximately 300 hectares on 2 sites 20 kilometers apart. The farm in the forest of Cabaret is 172 hectares. The other is right here in Savy. We're on a clay-lime plateau with lime outcroppings. My ambition for the past 20 years has been to rediscover the ecosystem that used to exist here, particularly at the beginning of the last century. The grey partridges, pheasants, quail, thrushes, larks, orioles, and even the songbirds such as the greenfinches, sparrows, goldfinches, and so on. The pigeons, doves, rabbits, everything from hares to deer, including the squirrels and snails that I reintroduced as well. I even invited a beekeeper who gets excellent results with the honey he harvests on the property. Some people will say that 1976 was the turning point in the general disappearance of wildlife. 1976 was that infamous drought year when for the first time we had to use large quantities of insecticide on the cereal crops. But I say that the greater blame lies with the land consolidations that started 10 years before that and that considerably changed the countryside. Before the consolidations, the land sections were all small, 3, 4, 5 hectares with hedgerows, earth berms, roads, etc., all of which was very good for game. But after the consolidations, the land sections were 30 to 40 hectares. They leveled the earth berms. They made the sections larger, erasing the margins around the fields. And they didn't leave a single square centimeter to non-productive land, so that the hedgerows disappeared and crop cultivation was utterly simplified. So what kind of space did that leave for game, for songbirds, for plant life? None, of course. That's quite obvious. The grey partridge is the mascot, the emblem of our plains here in Picardy. Without cereal crops, without the vast plains, there is no partridge, and vice versa. We can't have these plains without the sight of partridge flying overhead. That would be a shame. That's what makes the plains come alive with movement. With partridge, there's life, and what you have. And besides, the shape of the bird is magnificent. Sumptuous colors that blend with the earth. It's truly the bird of the Picardy land. Such a beautiful, beautiful bird. Wild partridge, larks, and corn buntings, those are three birds that have the same habits. They nest on the ground. They are all excellent bioindicators of the environmental quality in a given area. In the first census they made of the territory in '83, we had 11 pairs per 100 hectares. At the last census, this spring, we have risen to more than 80.82 pairs, with a breeding rate of 8.2 young per hen. All of this rests on the environmental tripod principle. It is important to respect three principles: land use planning, trapping, and population control. Land use planning. The effect of field margins is very, very important. Consequently, the greater the number of kilometers of a margin, the easier it is to attract partridge couples. From which I got the idea to divide my sections into very long and very narrow ones. Why so long? To make cultivation easier, I divided the section into a multiple of the sprayer's width. In other words, 38 meters. So my sections are 150 meters, or 4 passes with the sprayer. So no overlap applications, no waste of product, and this makes cultivation easier. Throughout my land, I planted short hedgerows, about 20 meters long, between each one of the sections. And for this, I used local species. I took the plants from the old existing hedgerows: blackthorn, apple, hawthorn, elderberry, dogrose, and other hedgerow species. I cleaned the grass from the underside of the hedge plants so that the birds could find shelter there. Pheasants like closed-off, covered spaces, but partridges prefer umbrellas, so that they are protected from hawks, but they still want to have a clear view. I planted the hedges on the small grassy banks that separate the sections, so that they wouldn't be in the way when we're cultivating the land. And I trimmed them to about 1.50 meters high, so that the spray boom can pass easily. Above and between each parcel of land, I've placed these wonderful grassy borders that are usually made up of fescue and cocksfoot for free draining land, or else a mix of the two. These grassy borders have to remain for a minimum of 5 years to produce insects, which are absolutely indispensable to the little partridges in their first 3 weeks of life. And at the same time, we've noticed that these insects, particularly carabid beetles, are essential to agriculture, because these lovely carabid beetles feed on the aphids that are vectors of the beet western yellow virus. They emerge in February and penetrate inside the field to a distance of about 60, 70, 80 meters. So you can see right away why my fields are 150 meters wide. With Jean-Louis Bernard, I've been discussing the synergy between beneficial insects and chemical crop protection for about the past 10 years. In the world of plant protection, we have long been interested in pest control and everything that has the potential to minimize the impact of this necessary control on natural environments. For example, with slugs, we know that with crops such as oilseed rape, the seedlings are excessively vulnerable to this pest. We've noticed for a long time that when grassy strips are adjacent to oilseed rape fields, the large populations of carabid beetles they shelter are able to partially protect the rape from the slugs, and this helps the farmers' efforts in protecting the crop. Let's take another example. Aphids and sugar beet, for instance. Aphids are fearsome pests for beet plants because they drastically reduce yields by transmitting all kinds of viral disease that also affect overall crop quality. Well, these aphids are greatly affected by the presence of grass borders around fields. We have studied the lineup of beneficial insects that are able to predate or parasitize these aphids: hoverflies, lacewings, ladybirds, and various hymenoptera. These beneficial insects are greatly encouraged when the grassy border beside the crop is enriched with fescue and cocksfoot. It has been demonstrated several times, and this means, in fact, that in areas that are adequately managed, it is possible to have a large population of this emblematic partridge cohabiting with a modern and productive form of agriculture. Having wild game with pre-war yields is relatively easy. As for myself, I don't have to be at all ashamed of my yields. Some sections have given up to 11 tons of wheat, and the average is around 10 tons of winter wheat. 4.5 tons of oilseed rape, 6 tons of field beans, 70 tons of sugar beet. These kinds of yields can't be obtained without rational crop protection. Weed control, of course, is essential. Protection against disease, as well as against heavy aphid attacks that surpass the capacity of crop beneficial insects to control them. All in all, I use products for crop protection when necessary, and of course, I select them from the list of registered products for each crop. I also prefer not to apply treatment whenever possible to the 6 meters surrounding the wheat fields, because when the aphid attacks aren't too significant, this leaves some food for the little partridges. For the past 6 years, I've totally ceased plowing, and even sold off my plow. This choice was motivated by agronomical, economic, and even shooting-related reasons. In fact, sugar beet seeds that have been buried for 20 to 30 years in the soil and constantly re-exposed by plowing were becoming difficult to control, especially given the cost of hand weeding. The erosion of plowed lands on slopes during the rainy periods was becoming more and more of a concern. And finally, a decrease in the organic matter content and the weather's natural influence in causing nitrogen loss made me decide to stop plowing. Soil erosion has just about disappeared from the farmland. The structure of the soils has improved, making the work of sowing and harvesting easier. Minimum tillage methods and intercroppings are the best means to reduce nitrate loss. Consequently, over the past several years, we have reduced nitrogen dose rates by 10 and even 20%, depending on the crop. The organic matter content, a real source of energy for the crops, has considerably increased with the help of earthworms. The time spent working the land has been reduced by about 25%, and fuel consumption has decreased by 30%, which shouldn't be ignored these days. And all of this has contributed to a definite decrease in the production costs. Along with Philippe Conval, we've been working on soil conservation agronomy and hunting-related aims. On Jack Hectare's farm, what was first at stake was to reduce erosion, to prevent it by re-establishing the vertical terraces of anisic earthworms. We had 150 kilos per hectare of earthworms in plowed sections before the use of minimum till methods. In minimum till fields, we're currently seeing 700 kilos per hectare of earthworms. In the grassy border sections, we're at about 1,000 kilos per hectare. In pastures with horses, there are 3 tons of earthworms per hectare of land. From a wildlife point of view, the benefits are twofold. We've just seen the earthworms. They're consumed by 65% of the small game hunted in France, of which 7% are exclusively earthworm feeders. The Eurasian woodcock, the northern lapwing, the common snipe, and then we have 45 to 50% which eat earthworms regularly, including the thrushes and blackbirds. The second wildlife issue with minimum tillage methods is that since this leaves crop residues on the surface, insects and seeds are consumed by partridges, skylarks, and cranes all year long. Dick Potts, the former director of the English Game Conservancy Trust, comes every year to sample insects at chick hatching time, around the 14th of June. Later on in the laboratory, he differentiates, identifies, and counts the species he's harvested. A bit later, in the beginning of July, when the first baby partridges come out of their nests, I harvest the droppings of these young partridges and send them in to verify which insects among the ones we've captured are consumed by the young birds. From year to year, the database grows, and our knowledge with it, of course. And we notice, additionally, that we are much more insect-rich here in France than our English friends. Besides the hedgerows, I attach a lot of importance to reflecting on crop cultivation and rotation. In other words, I make sure that a winter crop and a spring crop are placed beside each other. The winter crop encourages nesting, and the spring crop is particularly good for protecting against birds of prey. Alongside the grassy borders, I also use some rows of maize that protect against birds of prey, kale rows that produce water in the winter for feeding hares and deer, and also sweet clover and buckwheat, and so on. Our partridges are, of course, naturally wild partridges, but we have to help them along by boosting their nutrition. We use a grain feeder. We try as much as possible to place one feeder per couple, and this is where it's very important, because currently there are very few fixed landmarks in the landscape. The feeder is point of reference in the center of the couple's territory. In locating the grain feeders, I think that it's the birds themselves who decide where their territory is located. For example, when observing the cocks fighting, we set up an additional feeder. And then we effectively notice that the cocks align themselves each with their own feeder, and this creates a new territory. It's by observing this phenomenon that we were able to note that the territorial nature of these birds is very, very strong. So the feeders are very important. It's the survival of hens and the fact that the hen has to leave the nest to get food that is important. And the risk of predation by hawks or other birds of prey is high. Consequently, the hen will of course place her nest close to the feeder, sometimes only a few meters away, and that way her trips to gather food are less risky for herself and for her nest. We fill the feeders starting in the month of October and until the following harvest, practically without interruption, which uses up about 8 to 9 tons of wheat. I only use wheat per year. Songbirds, deer, rabbits, and so on also benefit. Control of predators. The second indispensable element is the control of predators. There is nevertheless a regulation for foxes and martens. For these, Philippe, the gamekeeper, uses the Belle-Île foothold snare. It is considered to be effective and very versatile for use on farmyard manure heaps. Furthermore, although rooks are essentially grain eaters, crows and magpies are nest plunderers and even eat baby birds. To control them, we use two kinds of cages. A large cage for capturing rooks, and small cages for crows and magpies. To do this, we mostly move the small cage around the territory of each pair of the crows and magpies. Population control. The third pillar is as important as the first two. It is population control. It's quite obvious that we can't say to ourselves, we're going to shoot for 10 days or 5 days. We shoot the number of birds that it is possible to harvest on the territory. And for this we count the number of pairs on the territory in spring by organizing blank drives, forcing the birds off the beat to avoid counting them twice. And then we have a first figure. That's the bird capital we have on the territory. And after the harvest, we sample 20 or so pairs that allow us to find out the average breeding success for each hen. Now this year we had a record figure of 8.2 young per hen, allowing me to harvest up to 200 birds on the territory. Shoot the birds when they're up in the sky. Don't shoot them as they skim over the beat. It's not very elegant either. So there are 8 gun pegs to be manned. The question I get asked the most often is about the cost of these arrangements. The answer is very complicated because everything is so closely related. What is beneficial for the agricultural activities is also beneficial for shooting, and vice versa. In any case, it's not more expensive than belonging to a shoot for wild boar or deer. And how pleasant it is to see the progress of all this wildlife on my territory. And I'll keep it up for as long as the world agricultural markets allow me to combine my great job as a farmer with my passion for hunting.